Hello and welcome everyone to panel 2 of the Schiller online conference. In the spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, all men become brethren. Before we begin our proceedings of the next 3 hours of discussions and presentations, we would like to set the tone with a musical offering. We'll be playing Antonin Dvorak's String Quartet number 12, in F major, nicknamed the American Quartet, and the excerpt is the final movement. If you've just tuned in, this is panel 2 of the Schiller Institute online conference, In the Spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, All Men Become Brethren. And you've just listened to a rendering of Antonin Dvorak's String Quartet number 12 in F major, which is also called the American Quartet because he composed and wrote it in the 1890s in the United States. The performance was by the Neo Quartet, and the performance was earlier this year, I think on September 15th, at a Bronx, New York City concert of the Schiller Institute chorus. Now, the conference title, of course, is taken from the pinnacle of German classical art, Friedrich Schiller's poem, of course, the Ode to Joy, set to music by Ludwig van Beethoven in his Ninth Symphony. And some might ask, well, all human beings become brothers and sisters. Isn't that a bit too idealistic? We are experiencing more and more conflicts. We're edging on nuclear war. Our foundations of our civilization are shaking. Look at Ukraine, the Middle East, look at the Indo-Pacific, look at Georgia and other hotspots. But the conference's purpose is to say these conflicts can be resolved and must be resolved, and a potential doomsday scenario can be averted, but it requires a bold vision of how to create a better future, a future of common development and peaceful dialogue of civilizations, including explicitly peaceful cooperation between great powers such as the United States, China, and of course Russia, India, and many others. Now, this bold vision I just mentioned already exists. You've seen it in the spirit of the recent BRICS summit in Russia. You've seen it in the progress of the Belt and Road Initiative in the recent 10 years. You can get a taste of what would be possible if the transatlantic NATO system stopped seeing this complex as a rival or a security threat or even as a deadly enemy, because it is not. It is really not. The Schiller Institute has been at the forefront of this vision for 4 decades. I would like to mention that it is now 10 years since the publication of a very special book, the EIR Special Report. Here you can see it also in Chinese and Arab translations, which was called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. It's really a landmark and visionary book that is as relevant today as it was 10 years ago. It contains the principles and very concrete proposals and projects to create this new bold vision, a world not yet seen, a world in which humanity will finally escape the state of material and also spiritual scarcity. We will discuss these ideas and projects during the panel proceedings. So this is why this panel is called The Great Projects to Overcome the Migrant Crisis, the New Quality Productive Forces, a New Just World Economic Order. First, I would like to show an excerpt from the presentation by the late US economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche, taken from his first half-hour presidential televised address to the nation on October 27th, 1976, in which he already warned of the dangers of thermonuclear war, global depopulation by geopolitical actors such as then George Ball and Henry Kissinger. Mind you, this was almost 50 years ago. He then explained his proposal for an international development bank and how it would benefit both the United States and Europe, as well as the developing world. Please show the video.
Because the world is in a monetary crisis, that is, because the monetary system constructed at the end of World War II is now collapsing, The case of Italy, the case of Britain, the collapse of the euro bond market, of the euro dollar market, the fact that 17, perhaps 20 developing sector nations are now in default on their international debts, the fact that there is no confidence in the international monetary system. Certain forces within the United States are committed to attempting to save this bankrupt monetary system. The methods to which they are resorting are consciously modeled upon those used earlier by Jaunachak, the Nazi finance minister, particularly during the 1933-36 period. That is, they are resorting to methods of extreme austerity, auto-cannibalistic austerity, in the effort to squeeze out of real incomes, of essential social services, and of the capital of industry itself, sufficient wealth to roll over for at least a time some of the bankrupt debt holdings of certain financial interests. Now, Ball illustrates his policy and Carter's policy by citing the case of Mexico. Ball endorses Paddock's proposal to reduce the population of Mexico, our neighbor, from 58 million to 28 million. He proposes to do this, and Paddock is very explicit on it, by the methods used by Hitler in eliminating 6 million Jews and Slavs and others in Eastern Europe during the war. By a forced, labor-intensive slave labor system in which those who are no longer suitable for this process of slave labor will be allowed to die. They use the word triage to describe this process of allowing the useless eaters to die.
In an interview on January 6th, William Paddock, the author of Famine 1975, said, "We are going to clamp the borders between the U.S. and Mexico down, then watch them scream. There is nothing that really could be done with them. Mexico cannot support its present population on a stable basis. The population will have to be cut to 30 million people."
That's the policy of Ball. That's the policy behind Kissinger's foreign policy. It's the policy behind a dominant group of the United States. The situation is such that if the President of the United States were to say on any Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday that this nation is committed to developing a new monetary system along the lines of the international development proposal, the overwhelming majority of the developing sector would immediately accept his proposal, that most of the governments of Europe, and I believe also the government of Japan, would accept that proposal immediately. It is my estimation that the agreements which would be reached under my proposal among various nations, this would involve the Comecon as well as Western Europe, the United States, and the developing sector, would involve about $300 billion a year of long-term credits created by treaty agreement to cause the flow of increased industrial production into viable development projects of agriculture, industry, and infrastructure in the developing sector. Feasible projects to this end are already well defined. It is merely necessary to create and channel the credit required to expand our capacity, our utilization of capacity in Western Europe, the United States, Japan, and so forth, in order to make these things go. Of this $300 billion I've estimated, approximately $100 billion of this long-term credit would be an increased annual output of industrial exports from the United States alone. Furthermore, the putting in of approximately $300 billion a year into this kind of long-term industrial and agricultural development will have side effects. That is, that the increase in global industrial production will gallop way ahead of $300 billion a year as a result of the secondary effects. That would mean that in this nation, we would turn around from industrial decay, enter a period of high capital formation with full utilization of our idle productive capacity, industrial productive capacity, with expansion of that capacity, with modernization of that capacity, and with jobs representing increasing skill levels available to a greater number of our population. And with the tax revenues available to the federal government, on the basis of that expansion, we would be able to meet the needs of our population. Without such a program, no one can meet those needs. You cannot keep a population in prosperity by trying to recarve a shrinking pie. Without a new monetary system, without major sources of new credit to revitalize industrial production, without credit to establish the markets in the developing sector necessary to revitalize that production, the United States is going into the worst depression in all history. But if we create those credits, then we're going to have the greatest prosperity in all history. Furthermore, if we establish such a monetary system, then the basic cause for the danger of war is eliminated.
You've seen an excerpt of a speech or televised address by the late US statesman and economist Lyndon LaRouche. This was from October 27th, 1976. Before we begin our first keynote address, I would like to mention that the Schiller Institute has prepared a special report in preparation of this conference, which is a roughly 20-page study called "The Development Drive Means Billions of New Jobs, No Refugees, No War." It was collected by a transatlantic team that put together this study, including today's keynote speaker, Dennis Small, who I will introduce very shortly. Many of the projects, including what Lyndon LaRouche has now elaborated on, the financing mechanisms in terms of credit system, will become very clear during Dennis' presentation. Now, the guiding idea is that the West, especially the industrialized nations like the US and Western Europe, should cooperate with the Global South. I would just like to read a quote from this report before I give the floor to Dennis. And it says, "The obvious and easy way to overcome the danger of war and confrontation is to convince the countries of the collective West, the European nations and even the US, to stop confrontation and adopt a mode of cooperation with this growing global majority. If the West would join hands with the BRICS and help the Global South to industrialize, we could not only stop the geopolitical competition, but could also start to overcome the migrant crisis in the only human way possible, namely to create conditions where the people who are now refugees instead have a perspective to be involved in the buildup of their own home countries." So without much further ado, I would like to introduce Dennis Small, who is a co-author of this study, and his presentation is called "Heard of Any Good Investments Lately?"
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Small, and my topic today is "Heard of Any Good Investments Lately?" Have you ever wondered what you could buy with $1 trillion? It's an interesting experiment and exercise. Let's go through it for a moment. For example, with $1 trillion, you could purchase the entire street value of the world's international drug trade, which is worth about that amount. And that would make Wall Street very happy, and the City of London too, since they're the ones who run that drug trade from the top. Or with $1 trillion, you could also purchase the entire goods bought by the defense budget of the United States for a year, and you could pay Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and they in turn would pay off their major stockholders, who are State Street and BlackRock and so on. Or with $1 trillion, you could pay the annual interest on the US federal budget, which is now $36 trillion and counting. And that would make Wall Street and the City of London happy as well. They would call that a good investment, since they're among the largest holders of those instruments. On the other hand, you could take $1 trillion and you could invest in building 46,000 kilometers of high-speed rail corridors, like China has done over the past 15 years or so. And that would go at the rate of about, in China, $17 to $21 million per kilometer. Now, the cost of that in Europe is about 50% higher. And they recognize that that's because there are economies of scale in China for those building projects. And the cost of the United States is unknown for the simple reason that we don't have a high-speed rail in the United States. So the question is, are these good investments? Is it a good investment to invest in rail? Is it a good investment to invest in the drug trade? Well, that really depends on what you mean by good. Now, Lyndon LaRouche addressed this issue for 50 years as the world's leading physical economist. And I want to start with that because in his 1984 book, The Science of the Human Mind, LaRouche said the following: "The individual who contributes to making society good is worth 1,000 times the individual who wanders through life scattering only individual good deeds. For a bad society will crush the good contributed by its individual members. Who makes society good thus preserves the goods contributed by thousands and millions of individuals." Close quote. In other words, doing the good is also scientifically the best economic investment. Now, the world stands today in the throes of a systemic breakdown crisis leading to the danger of nuclear war on numerous different fronts. It has also brought the physical economy and the financial system of the world to the point of implosion, threatening lives that way as well. And one of the things which this has done is to unleash a refugee crisis in Europe and in the United States as a result of the economic circumstances and also the wars that have been created by the same dying system. But it has been the devastation of the countries of the global south which have created the forced migration of waves of millions of people into Europe and into the United States. Now, the solution to these crises, all of these crises, is readily at hand, and it involves the United States and Europe cooperating with China in particular, and with the BRICS more generally, and the Belt and Road Initiative, which 151 countries have joined so far, for the purpose of helping the South develop its economies and to establish a cooperative basis of development as opposed to confronting or declaring war against those nations. If we do that, that will lead to a massive boom in US and European export of capital goods to these areas, which in turn will be central to reactivating our own economies. So let's start by looking at the issue of poverty and forced migration to get into the details of this. If you take a look at this slide, which is on your screen at this point, you will see that the question of poverty, if one looks at and compares sub-Saharan Africa and China, back in the year 2000, the poverty level around the world was of 3.146 billion people. Now, I want to clarify by poverty here, I don't mean extreme poverty, which the UN classifies as at $2.15 a day, but rather the general UN parameter of $3.65 a day, which they take to mean the poverty line for middle and lower income countries. So the world then had over 3 billion poor, of which 497 million were in Africa and 926 million were in China at the time. Now, a generation later, in 2024, the number of poor in Africa had grown to 718 million people, which is 58% of the entire population there. And during that same period of time, China had reduced their poor population from 926 million to 0. Total world poverty dropped from 3.1 billion to 1.1 billion, but about half of that entire drop was due to China and their achievements. Now, if we turn and take a look at the situation of refugees, the first thing that's immediately obvious by looking at these figures on poverty is small wonder then that there's no wave of refugees from China arriving on the shores of Europe or of the United States. Now, if we look at a map of the refugees entering or illegal border crossings into Europe in 2020, the official map provided by Frontex, you can see what the pathways are, the routes are, and it turns out that the three countries with the highest number of illegal border crossings were Syria, war, Afghanistan, war, and Guinea-Bissau, bone-crushing poverty. So if you want to take a look at the question of migration, you're going to have to look at the underlying issues here. Now, in the case of the United States and the Americas, it's something that's actually quite similar because the ability of the economy to maintain the existing populations in Mexico and Central America, that is to say, the potential relative population density of those countries is actually lower than the existing populations. Not surprisingly, as a result of that economic physical collapse, millions of migrants are leaving to stay alive and to be able to send back remittances to keep their families alive as well. The proportions are staggering. In the case of Mexico, almost 9% of its entire population are in the United States as first-generation immigrants. In the case of a country like El Salvador, the proportion is closer to 23%. Now, if you want to know why, simply take a look at the slide on your screen at this point, which is food production per capita in Mexico. And what I've taken here, using an index of 1981 of physical units per capita, these are kilograms or tons per capita per person. The rest of the physical economy of Mexico shows a similar tendency, and this, I think, explains exactly what the fundamental cause is of the migrant crisis and points in the direction of what the solutions have to be. Now, what can we do about all this situation? Well, if we work with the BRICS, and if we work with China and the Belt and Road, we can invest with them in the areas of the South to dramatically lower world poverty and world unemployment. Actual unemployment around the world, according to a detailed study which we performed back in 2020, the numbers for 2019 was that the real unemployment rate worldwide was 46%. Now, that's largely the so-called informal economy, where people are simply not producing anything useful, but somehow scrounging their living out of drug production, out of prostitution, out of begging on the street, and so on. So just to employ that portion of the population productively, you need 1.7 billion jobs today. And if we consider what the increase will be of the population from now until the year 2050, looking forward another generation, 25 years, the population will rise from about 8.1 billion today to just under 10 billion. That means that given the rise of the labor force, and incidentally, 50% of that increase of the population is going to be occurring in Africa. So this means that the total number of jobs that need to be created between today and 2050 now approximates 2.5 billion new jobs. Now, can we really turn the world economy around like that? Is it possible to do that in a generation? Well, if China can do it, why not we? And all the more so if we combine the economic potential of the different but complementary economies, the physical economies of China and Russia and countries of the East and the West, including the United States and Europe. Now let's take a look at a few examples. On November 14th of this year, the port of Chancay was inaugurated by a joint investment of Peru and China in Peru. This is a deep water port which cost about $3.4 billion. It's fully automated and it's equipped to handle the largest container ships in the world, which are 24,000 TEUs. Now, that's a lot of containers. Not every port can handle that. In fact, very few can, such that exporting from Chancay today to, say, Shanghai across the other side of the world, they cannot send ships directly because they don't dock ships that are big enough in Chancay to do that. Well, now they'll be able to do that. Previously, they had to go through Long Beach and so on. The approximate travel time for shipping under those old circumstances was 35 days. With the new port of Chancay, it's now going to take 23 days. That's a 30% savings in efficiency and productivity, which is enormous when you consider the scale of world shipping. If you build a high-speed rail line running the entire length of South America, up through Central America, through Mexico, connecting with the United States, which needs a whole lot more rail itself, across the Bering Strait Tunnel, connecting into the Eurasian land bridge, which does exist and is being built, the actual time of travel on high-speed rail that could be built on that area is about 3 days or less. 3 days versus 23 days. That's an order of magnitude improvement in productivity by that process. Now, it's also the case that land corridors, unlike maritime corridors, you can build around them. You can build a whole industrial corridor, 100 kilometers on each side of these railroads, not something that's quite so easily done in the sea in these days. Now, if in addition to that, in South America, you do the kind of things that the Chinese have done in their country, which is you build a rail line connecting the Pacific port of Chancay to the Atlantic port of Santos in Brazil. That's about a 5,000 kilometer route. You're going to be able to open up the entire continent to industrial development and to exchange and participation with the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the total cost of this, roughly estimated, since we're talking about maybe 25,000 kilometers total rail lines, is somewhere just north of $500 billion, less than about $500 billion. Now, that's a good investment. Why should China be the only country benefiting from these kinds of projects? Why shouldn't American and European companies participate as well in the design engineering and in the actual building of these projects and the exportation of capital goods and machine tools and so on to make sure that they can occur? Now, the same type of thing applies to great projects in Africa, and I'll just mention one or two. Africa today has about 580 million people who lack electricity. This is according to international authorities, and their installed capacity is only 246 gigawatts. And what's needed is about a 10-fold increase of that installed capacity to bring Africa up to European per capita standards. Now, what do we do about this? Well, in addition to building gas-fired plants and coal plants, which are a very good idea, and of course, nuclear energy, which is critical for the entire continent to leapfrog into higher technological platforms, hydroelectric is also a very good idea. And the Grand Inga Dam is a project in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which, when it is completed, this is 150 kilometers more or less upstream from where the Congo River flows into the Atlantic Ocean. But this will have hydropower potential of at least 40 gigawatts, maybe up to 70, and that will make it the largest power station on the face of the earth. This will increase Africa's installed capacity by about 25%, this project alone. Now, the head of the new development bank of the BRICS, Dilma Rousseff, commented last year, said the following, speaking of the Grand Inga Dam: "It has 3 times the capacity of the Itaipu Dam in Brazil and twice the capacity of the Three Gorges Dam in China. The Grand Inga Dam is capable of serving as an energy source for an entire continent." Now, geographically nearby is the famous and really magnificent Transaqua project, which would build dams on the right side tributaries of the Congo River and also about 2,400 kilometers of waterways that would help refill Lake Chad, which is now drying out, and re-engineer the entire area to create a favorable environment for development for some 50 million people. All of this, Ibero-America, Africa, Asia, the United States itself, Europe as well, but all of this creates a booming market for capital goods and technology exports from the United States and Europe, involving trillions of dollars of new orders. This would create in the range of 50 million new manufacturing jobs in the United States, which are urgently needed, since there has been a collapse of basic manufacturing jobs in this country. The United States itself can overcome the shortage of industrial capacity, which it now has, by producing for export and by rebuilding its own industrial base. We estimate that U.S. machinery and mechanical appliance exports in 2022 totaled only $240 billion. This could be quadrupled to about $1 trillion a year within a 4 or 5 year period, and onward from there. So solving the migrant problem by developing the countries where the population is now forced, should they care to survive, to go to Europe and to the United States, at the same time is the basis for solving the problem of economic collapse in the West itself as well. Now, at this point in the discussion, people often ask, okay, but where is the money going to come from to do all of that? Well, this is actually the easy part because you don't need money. What you need is credit, and they're very different things. Sovereign governments create credit, which they give value to by channeling investments with that credit into activities which increase the productive powers of labor by doing good things, not investing in wars, not investing in debt service of a 2 quadrillion speculative bubble, and not by running the drug trade, but good things of the sort we've described. Now, over the course of a half century, Lyndon LaRouche wrote many studies about how to make such a new system work, emphasizing how to distinguish, above all, between good investments and bad. And here's how he summarized it in his July 2000 document on a basket of hard commodities, Trade Without Currency. LaRouche said, "A basket of commodities, as I have outlined that case here, is thus to be understood as a shared commitment to do good. The issue of economy is therefore not the exact price to be placed on any commodity, but the goodwill expressed in the way a reasonable estimate of a fair price is adopted. On that basis, a reasonable price for a unit basket of commodities will be the right price in practice." Close quote. Now, that concept of the good may remind you of the quote from LaRouche that I read at the very beginning, where he explained that who makes society good thus preserves the goods contributed by thousands and millions of individuals. Gottfried Leibniz, whom LaRouche described as the founder of scientific physical economy, wrote in 1694, and I quote, "They can do as much for their happiness as if they had 1,000 hands and 1,000 lives. Yes, as if they lived 1,000 times as long as they do. For so much is our life to be valued as a true life as one does good in it. Who now does much good in a short time is equal to him who lives 1,000 times longer. This occurs with those who can cause thousands and thousands of hands to work with them, through which in a few years more good can happen to their highest glory and enjoyment than many hundreds of years could otherwise bring." Close quote. Now, what better definition of productivity than that could one ask for? And this brings me to my conclusion, which was also the starting point of the Schiller Institute's call for broad deliberation on the principles which are to underlie the proposed new paradigm. And that was Helga Zepp-LaRouche's November 22nd, 2022 discussion document, 10 Principles of a New International Security and Development Architecture, including its highly controversial 10th principle. And I quote, "10th, the basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul. And being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. You were listening to Dennis Small, who is the head of the Ibero-America desk of the Schiller Institute. And if you've just tuned in, you are witnessing the panel 2 of the Schiller Institute online conference in the spirit of Beethoven and Schiller, or Schiller and Beethoven, all men become brethren. Now, next on the panel is Dr. Alexander Bobrov. He is an associate professor at the Department of Diplomacy at MGIMO University in Moscow. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the floor to address such a respected audience and all of those who really think about the future of mankind, the future of international relations. My name is Dr. Alexander Kyrillovich Bobrov. I am Associate Professor at the Department of Diplomacy at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. And as you well understand, I deal with diplomacy. And diplomacy, in my view, is a tool of statecraft aimed at resolving different political conflicts by peaceful means. And what we see now, generally, is actually the crisis of diplomacy. And this is something which I believe is very important, and it is the root of all evil that now exists in contemporary international relations. So basically, my speech will be dedicated to the crisis of diplomacy, what are the distinguishing features of this crisis, and what is to be done about that in general. Well, first of all, I would like to say that the crisis of diplomacy is something that is seen not entirely in the world. It can be seen only through the, if we contemplate at what is going on now in the bilateral relations between the West and Russia in general, and the US-Russia relations in particular. We see the absence of any negotiations between the leaders of these countries, between the President Vladimir Putin and his American or European counterparts. We see that there is absolutely no dialogue between the ministers of foreign affairs, between the US State Department and the Russian foreign ministry. The same might be applied to the dialogue between our foreign ministry and those of European countries. And I believe that this is a damning example of how diplomacy should not be operating in general. What we also see is the waves of different expulsions of Russian diplomats from different Western countries, which bars any form of official dialogues between our countries. And as you understand, that coupled with different waves of sanctions that are introduced against Russia, against our economy, this is something that creates a situation whereby we are stuck in a vicious circle of hostilities and a vicious circle of different political activities that prevent us from finding any consensus. Because, as you understand, now many Western strategies are aimed at implementing a tit-for-tat policy, meaning that every single action that is taken by Russia, for instance, should have its retaliatory measures, and as a result, it brings us into a diplomatic deadlock, whereby diplomacy no longer exists or no longer function in our bilateral relations. I believe that the only way to get out of this vicious circle is to start communicating with one another. Diplomacy is about talking, about listening, and about hearing one another. And I must say that the official position of the Russian government was also very overt. It was open to any forms of dialogue, even if we disagree. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should see eye to eye on everything that is going on in the world, in our bilateral relations, in everything that is going on in Eurasia, for instance. But it means that we have to be able to convey messages, to understand what are actually the implications of the actions being taken. And of course, what can we do in order to bring together our civilizations, our countries? In my speech, I would like just briefly address several key issues that have to do with the grand strategy of Russia, because this is something which is of great importance and of great interest for myself as a specialist who actually write extensively in English and Russian about the grand strategy of Russia, about the foreign policy of my country, and about diplomacy in general. I believe that the only way is to discuss the principles of international law, of international agreements, by which you could actually create favorable conditions so that a country could pursue the policy that could be more or less consistent with the national interest of your countries. And this is only through diplomacy that this kind of negotiations that can be sealed. At the same time, I believe that what is going on in U.S.-Russia relations is also fraught with very dire consequences, especially taking into consideration the fact that the US and Russia possess 90% of all nuclear weapons, and we are at risk of a full-fledged nuclear war unless something is taken. And first of all, what should be done is, I would say, finding a new way to introduce a new lease of life into the different disagreements in terms of arms control. We used to have so many different agreements, the one that were aimed at reducing nuclear weapons and to prevent from any form of direct use of these nuclear weapons. And this is something that was also ignored, and then it was something that was ignored and fully it was ignored by the West, especially when the US governments decided to withdraw from several treaties that were signed between the USA and USSR during the times of the Cold War, or between US and Russian governments in the 1990s and in the early 21st century. I believe that everything that is going on now around Ukraine is also a damning example of how European structure of and the European system of security should not be operating, especially when we look at the crisis of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which doesn't actually, which is no longer providing security and cooperation in this continent. Well, by this I mean that NATO and USA hijacked all other multilateral institutions, with the European Union being just an economic dimension to the NATO-led European alliance. And this is something which grieves not only Russia, but also different neutral countries which are forced to enter NATO and to become the part of this anti-Russian system. And by saying this, I first of all think about Sweden and Finland, that used to be neutral even in the times of the Cold War, and now they are the part of all the preparations that are made against Russia for the sake of an eventual conflict, something that diplomats are trying to prevent. I believe that this US-Russia diplomatic crisis pays its toll not only on what is going on in Europe or in Eurasia in general, but also in other parts of the globe. For instance, what we see now in the Middle East, especially with this tug of war between Israel and Iran, is also the something that has to do with the fact that we see such bad relations between Moscow and Washington, because our two countries could have created favorable conditions for diplomatic resolution of this conflict in order to prevent Israel from directly attacking Palestinians, from launching a military operation against Lebanon. When I speak about the strategic situation, I firstly and foremost think about the Asia-Pacific region, especially what is going on in terms of containing China, containing North Korea, and all these policies that are aimed by the US to create this Indo-Pacific region, meaning that US is supporting Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, in order to put the works in the wheels of the Chinese economy. This is something which certainly doesn't create favorable conditions for peaceful coexistence in this region. And by creating dividing lines in this region, we only advancing the potential conflicts that exist in this country, exist in these countries and in this region. So I believe that this diplomatic crisis is something which is fraught with direct repercussions for all over the world. It is not only about only Washington and Moscow or Washington and European countries. It's about our global village. It is about how we would be living in the 21st century in the world. And I believe and I strongly hope that diplomacy will prevail. In order to prevail, we have to understand our common interest. We have to understand our respected strategies. In order to understand that, we have to walk in other person's shoes and try to understand every single conflict and every single item on the agenda, not only through our own lenses, but also through the prism of our counterparts. And I clearly see that Russia is trying to understand the motivation of the West countries, of Ukraine, of other countries that are very aggressive against Russia, but we don't see that coming in response. And which is why I really hope that this conference would help provide this collective understanding of different issues that exist in the world, and that collectively we could at least help politicians to come to draw right conclusions from everything that is going on. Once again, to get out of this vicious circle of tit-for-tat aggressive responses. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and I would be happy to answer different questions if you still have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bobrov, for your contribution about the crisis of diplomacy. Of course, we have to say that here in Berlin, the crisis of diplomacy, the expulsion of Russian diplomats is also very much, done by the Foreign Office of Germany, especially Foreign Secretary Baerbock. And now we want to bring up the next speaker. This was, by the way, Dr. Bobrov, who is an associate professor at the Department of Diplomacy at MGIMO, which is the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and is part or funded by the Russian Foreign Ministry. Now, the next speaker is His Excellency Professor Dr. Manuel Hassassian, who is a Palestinian citizen, and he is the Palestinian ambassador to Denmark. The floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Professor Manuel Hassassian, the ambassador of Palestine in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm delighted to address you, through this Zoom or video, because, I could not be with you on the same day of the conference because I will be traveling abroad. And my talk is going to be around the harsh realities and the optimistic outlooks, which I think it's a pathway to peace and justice. And I will try to focus my points within the 10 minutes required from me to do so. I would start by saying that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is often a focal point of regional tensions. A conflict that is still unresolved despite numerous international resolutions. Currently, Palestinians endure what is considered the longest occupation in modern history, and still struggle to achieve self-determination and freedom. They face the harsh realities of ethnic cleansing nowadays, displacement, genocide, and apartheid, yet maintain a resilient stance of steadfastness and resistance against all the difficult hurdles they face. The conflict extends beyond specific dates such as October 7. While events on that date can provoke reactions, the underlying causes stem from deep-seated historical and political dynamics. For those enduring decades of occupation, such actions may be seen as a natural response to their harsh circumstances, often described as genocidal. These events significantly shifted global public opinion, eliciting widespread sympathy and empathy for the Palestinian plight. Moreover, such a dramatic shift was amplified by extensive coverage on social media and mainstream news, shedding light on the enduring impact of occupation atrocities across generations. Today, Palestinians advocate for the fundamental human rights principle of self-determination. The question then arises as to why the global community universally supports self-determination as articulated in Woodrow Wilson's 14-point speech, yet often disregards this principle in the context of Palestine. Hence, this leads one to safely assume that Palestinians may be perceived by some countries as deserving less consideration in their quest for recognition as an independent nation state within the international community. This enduring conflict, which has persisted for many years, has not adequately stirred the conscience of the global community. It has often been regarded as a regional dispute or a conflict between two parties vying for the same territory. However, Palestinians assert that they are not contesting the land, but rather asserting their rightful ownership of the land. They view Zionists as colonial intruders who have sought to control their homeland. Therefore, from their perspective, the conflict is not simply a matter of competing claims over shared land. It is perceived as an incursion by the Zionist movement. The Zionist endeavor backing from the international with response of these actions for the last 76 years. How can we bring about an end to this? The discourse on the practices associated with this contentious occupation could extend to a long discussion. Yet the crux of the matter is clear. How can we bring about an end to this conflict? Moreover, who are the primary stakeholders endeavoring to forge a resolution? It is frustrating that despite positioning itself as the gavel holder of the peace process for the last 3 decades, the U.S. has faltered, resorting more to crisis management than conflict resolution. Presently, it is evident that the U.S. has failed dismally in its role as an honest broker for peace, as it has disproportionately supported Israel, the dominant party, over Palestine, the marginalized counterpart. In the current global landscape, the notion of using individuals or countries as mere pawns in international conflicts is increasingly deemed untenable. While such conflicts have the potential to escalate into regional or even global wars, the root causes are often traced back to fundamental issues like extreme hunger, abject poverty, and national interests. Therefore, a question arises: what implications would the recognition of Palestine as a state hold for the international community? Notably, Palestine has previously demonstrated a willingness to compromise, as evidenced by its acceptance to only 22% of historic Palestine for statehood back in 1988. This territory encompasses the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, while the remaining 78% was accorded to the Zionist project of Israel today. Despite this major compromise, the quest for further territorial expansion, particularly in the West Bank, persists among certain extreme Jewish factions within Israel, represented by the settlers movement and its intensive activities to colonize the occupied West Bank and prevent any possibility of creating a sustainable Palestinian state. That said, it is important to note that Israel's interest in Gaza primarily revolves not only around security considerations, but also an economic agenda to exploit the natural resources such as the gas on the seashores, besides territorial ambitions. While past agreements between Jordan, Egypt, and Israel exist, they are often seen as cold peace by many in the region who believe that true peace can only come when Palestinians have their rights legitimately recognized. This sentiment solidifies the need for genuine self-determination for Palestinians to pave the way for a wider acceptance of a legitimate Israel in the Arab world. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, peace building involves efforts beyond diplomatic agreements, including grassroots initiatives, civil society engagement, and reinforcing democratic values on both sides. Such a process aims to promote open dialogue and conducive conditions for coexistence between Palestine and Israel, ultimately contributing to conflict resolution and the development of stable democracies that do not fight each other. Economic development is a precursor that could play a pivotal role in creating global security by addressing regional security in protracted conflicts such as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. By prioritizing economic cooperation over military solutions, nations worldwide can embrace a win-win approach that promotes global stability and prosperity. That being said, peace transcends the absence of conflict. It is a catalyst for economic advancement, which serves as a substructure for societies to their combined moral imperative and basically offering a future vision for harnessing security and stability. Conflict resolution within the framework of global dynamics could be the linchpin method for sustainable development, economic prosperity, and lasting stability. To that end, the European Union provides a notable historical example, illustrating how nations at war can form economic alliances following conflict resolution. Several private sectors will thrive when peace is achieved, particularly in trade, tourism, investment, healthcare, education, and social welfare. In general, economic incentives are crucial for global security and stability. In the case of Palestine, however, foreign aid could catalyze the development, enhance stability, and hence prevent conflict. One could infer that the economics of peace could develop in parallel with global prosperity, and the resolution of the long-standing occupation of Palestine could be the opening pathway of hope for ending conflict and building bridges of economic and trade ties with Israel and neighboring Arab states. Developing Palestinian human capital and infrastructure will form the levers for economic growth and sustainability, thus ensuring social welfare aligns with economic foundations, which will be the essential base to sustain growth and development. Last but not least, political resolutions are indispensable for economic development to materialize. Small, layered brick achievements hold significance in attaining the regional and global security. Ultimately, meaningful progress while realizing these aspirations remains pending until the war stops with a permanent ceasefire. Let me say just a few words about the Schiller Institute and the Oasis Plan for Economic Development. Of course, I commend the work of the Schiller Institute for its continuous struggle to bring justice to the world, and I think it is a noble mission that we believe by raising awareness and stating the true facts on the ground, it will make people listen to its objectives. And I think the approach that Schiller Institute takes towards conflict, not only by Palestinian-Israeli, but to the international, gives great credibility to this institute that looks forward towards peace and justice through economic development. The Oasis video is one of the most impressive that I have ever seen for the Schiller Institute, let alone comparing it with others. I think you have to continue with what you are doing. I commend the Schiller Institute for what they have been doing, and I would be from now on continue to support this institute, which I think is one of the most brilliant and impressive institutes that I have met in Denmark. My loyalty and respect to you, and I hope that will continue for our future relationships by bringing more people into dialogue and try to create a harmonious peace among adversaries. May God also help us in the process, because really it's full of hurdles and full of complexities, but eventually we shall overcome. And when the dust settles, I believe that we should not continue to wait for Godot. We need instrumental, plausible solutions to end this conflict that has been going on for the last 76 years. And I hope this conference will address the multifaceted issues of conflicts in the world, let alone pinning it down to what is going today in Palestine. And we hope from God that this war will end and this genocide will stop and this mayhem will stop once and for all, and to let the Palestinian people enjoy, like the rest of the nations, the self-determination and the freedom of speech and the securing of justice and the sustainability of peace in the near future. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and wish you all the success in the conference, and I hope that future events will continue with such endeavors until peace is achieved. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Hassassian. A very important presentation. Thank you for the endorsement of the Oasis Plan. We want to do everything to make this possible, to bring peace to the region. And thank you for pointing out the pivotal and crucial role that economic development plays for security and the ending of conflict. So this was Professor Dr. Manuel Hassassian, Palestinian ambassador to Denmark. If you've just tuned in a little bit late, you are seeing the Schiller Institute's online conference in the spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, All Men Become Brethren. And this is panel 2, titled The Great Projects to Overcome the Migrant Crisis, the New Quality Productive Forces, a New Just World Economic Order. I would like to proceed with Chandra Muzaffar in Malaysia, who is the founder and president of the International Movement for a Just World, JUST or JUST. Please, Mr. Muzaffar.
Can you imagine a genocide televised, disseminated all over the world? We're all witnesses to it, and yet we're not able to do a thing to stop it. And it's so obvious what is at the root of this genocide. It is basically not just Israel, mind you, but the United States wanting to ensure its dominant hold over that region of the world, West Asia. And the United States doesn't want an independent, sovereign Palestinian state. They've never supported this idea, have they? They haven't. Neither has Israel. Some of the other Western countries have given lip service to this idea, but basically it's control and dominance. So this is a blatant, a stark example of what the global system is. And you can say that this is also true of the other dimensions of the global system, economics, culture, the control and dominance is very, very clear. And I won't go into details, because we're all aware of what has happened over the last so many years. The last 78 years, 79 years. The question is, can we change this? There's rising consciousness, yes, people are aware, but I'm not so sure whether we'll be able to change it in the near future. That rising consciousness, and in a sense, Gaza has contributed to it. How has it contributed to it? Because of what has happened in Gaza, people for the first time know the true face of Israel, especially a lot of people in the West. For us, it is something we have known all along. But a lot of people in the West, they know what Israel really is and what it stands for. And more than that, a lot of people know the link with the US, and they know what the US stands for. They become very much aware of US hegemony and how it works. But being able to change that is a challenge. It's going to take a long while. Consciousness would help. And then, of course, after consciousness, the next stage is when consciousness develops, the next stage would be the ability to organize, to mobilize, and to bring about institutional changes. That won't be that easy. Take a simple example of the difficulty of bringing about institutional changes. We cannot even get rid of the veto in the Security Council. 5 nations have the veto. People talk about wanting to get rid of the veto, but the veto is there. And every 5 years, 10 years, we talk about UN reforms, but no one is able to do anything about the veto. See how difficult it is to bring about changes of this sort. But the hope lies with the people. I feel that ordinary people in the end, they represent hope. And when I say ordinary people, it's not just people in the global south, it's people in the global north, which is why I think it is good what the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche movement is trying to do as far as the north is concerned, meaning by which the Western countries, trying to make people aware of this and trying to work with countries in other parts of the world. That is important. I don't think we would be able to bring about the change of consciousness or mobilize, to galvanize people in the north. We won't be able to do that, meaning by which people like us from the global south. But we can do what we should in the south. For the north, the task will have to be the task of groups in the north. And at the end of the day, those groups in the north and those groups in the south will have to work together to bring about this change. And this is what Justice has been trying to do. And I addressed the second part of my presentation, which is looking at the global situation. That is a challenge. Justice try to play a role. It's a small, tiny, little voice in the midst of this challenge. But it is a voice that will continue to be heard. Even after some of us are not around, I hope that voice will continue to be heard because it is a long, long challenge. Thank you, Mike. Maybe we can have some questions. Is that part of the agenda?
I don't know.
I think the video ended a little bit early. But anyway, this was the presentation, an interview done by Mike Billington of the Schiller Institute with Chandra Muzaffar of Malaysia, the founder and president of the International Movement for a Just World. This was pre-recorded. Next, we have a presentation from Germany by Michael Limburg, who is the vice president of EICE, the European Institute of Climate and Energy. The presentation is called Climate Ideology is Dead. Okay.
Beginnen möchte ich. Mein Vortrag heißt Die Klimaideologie.
My lecture is called Climate Ideology is Dead. But before I start with it, I would like to say again that the spoken word applies. I would like to start with a saying of the American author Harold Lewis, who said, "Global warming is the biggest and most successful pseudoscientific fraud I have seen in my long life as a physicist." This is what he said in the resignation letter to the American Physical Society. via email. Back to my lecture. For this interview, I was asked to give my impression of how the world views this climate religion today. That is 26 years after the IPCC was founded. Yes, it is a climate religion that uses science as its high priest. To cut a long story short, this climate religion, or in a broader sense, one could also speak of an ideology, a climate ideology. This climate religion is dead. Not quite dead yet, but very close to it. Unfortunately, and I have to add this unfortunately, neither the EU nor Germany have understood this. And unfortunately, neither does the United Nations, which hopes to achieve a significant increase in power as a result. How do I know this for sure? Before I go into that, I would like to say something about myself. I'm a trained engineer, specializing in electrical engineering in general and communications engineering in particular. And I also have an additional degree in measurement and control technology. The training also included a scientific study of physics and certain parts of chemistry, so I felt well equipped to understand the idea of the harmful climate impact of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but also to correctly classify the associated processes, and I have been doing that for 24 years now. At the beginning, I had no idea about the climate. I took it as it comes, namely as a statistical summary of local weather data over at least 30 years, as defined by the World Meteorological Organization, and was actually quite happy to live in an area that is characterized by a mild continental climate. At the beginning, I had no problem accepting that CO2 has this terrible effect, although I remembered the chemistry from the very beginning, which drilled into me that CO2 in the atmosphere was one of the traces gas that together, all of them together, made up less than 1% by volume. And CO2, moreover invisible, de facto non-toxic, up to about 8,000 ppm or 0.8% as a limit value, was continued in the air around the year 1990 at about 380 ppm or only 3.038%, or to put it another way, out of 10,000 molecules of air, only 4 are CO2, and only one of these, namely the increase from 3 to 4, has been added in the last 150 years. So says the IPCC, 1 in 10,000, non-toxic, does not combine well with other substances, not like a poison, and invisible. So that was the starting point, and very quickly I realized that the CO2 thing was wrong. And since I had plenty of time, I tried to get to the bottom of it because maybe I had overlooked something. Well, the deeper I dug, the more I realized that there was nothing, absolutely nothing. To illustrate this, I have here a picture by Willy Sohn, an astrophysicist who worked at Harvard for many years and was one of the first climate realists. It shows the rough energy processes that determine the energy balance of the Earth's atmosphere. To save you counting, there are 18 processes. And of these 18 processes, 17 are linked to water vapor, and only one, which is atmospheric composition, has anything to do with CO2, albeit remotely. It is one of 18, and even then only very remotely. And yet, starting with the engineer calendar in the 1930s, who referred to the long discredited Svante Arrhenius, this idea slowly began to gain ground, particularly in the Western world. The Club of Rome certainly contributed to this development, and we have Alexander King's statement from the 1970s, quote, "In our search for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that air pollution, the threat of global warming, water scarcity, famine, and the like would be the right thing," unquote. This quote is from the first global revolution from the Club of Rome. And while I'm quoting, I would like to quote Sir John Houghton, the first chair of the IPCC, who drummed it into his colleagues, quote, "If you don't announce disasters, no one will listen to us," unquote. And so it was. But if you allow me, I will now quote Svante Arrhenius's Bernd Fleischmann, also an engineer and a self-confessed climate realist like me. Quote, Arrhenius then applied his false theory to the greenhouse Earth. Instead of window glass, he used the greenhouse gases, water vapor, HO2, and carbon dioxide, CO2, which allow the visible solar radiation to pass through to the Earth, but partially absorb the infrared radiation emitted by the Earth. In his works from 1896 to 1901, he referred to John Tyndall, who measured the absorption of heat radiation by the Earth through the CO2 in the atmosphere. However, some doubt this and say that he was only able to measure the absorption by water vapor with his measuring setup. Arrhenius claimed that the results of the latter correlate very well with my experiments, but he failed to mention that he had divided Tyndall's results by 3.6. That's what you call fraud, unquote. Apart from that, Arrhenius was not even able to measure the absorption by CO2 with his measuring setup. He measured the absorption by water vapor instead, quote end. And yet, this idea began to blame CO2, especially the CO2 released by all combustion processes, that is man-made CO2, for all the world's evil. A real hype, a religion, an ideology emerged. And that's because the left, after realizing that communism was no longer really working, 100 million people had died with it. The Black Book of Communism notes wanted to think of a new group of victims, namely all those who had to suffer from the rich West. It was no coincidence that the first conference at which this climate ideology was proclaimed was the 1992 Rio conference. At this conference, the concept of sustainable development was adopted, which then gave rise to Agenda 21. Shortly afterwards, Ms. Brundtland, the patron of this conference, who was a minister president, freely admitted in an interview with a Canadian reporter, quote, the program of the Socialist International is the basis of the Rio conference, unquote. And in 1995, the first of the IPCC conferences took place in Berlin. And who financed and organized it? Well, you know, it was Mrs. Merkel. Even then, she was more concerned with saving the world than with advancing her homeland, Germany. And then it really took off. Driven by the green left of all kinds and gratefully received by the developing countries, the industrialized West had to repent in an unprecedented way. Trillions of dollars or euros changed hands, while in the early years, people in the West still approved of this development with goodwill. After all, environmental protection was the order of the day. No one in the right mind would pee in the pond from which they get their drinking water, to repeat a well-known bon mot of the former Czech president. And the climate ideologues ingeniously combined climate protection with environmental protection. It really only got going after Paris with its agreement. According to McKinsey, climate protection for climate neutrality will cost Germany 6 trillion euros, while others, such as Professor Tess, estimate that the so-called energy transition alone will cost 10 trillion euros. 10 trillion is so much that because the year has 31,140,000 seconds, and if you save or earn 1,000 euros per second, then you would have to do this for 321 years. Or if you try that per minute, you would have to multiply it by 60, and which would give you 19,261 years. Only then you would have 10 trillion euros. And it is no different in the other Western countries. People are realizing that these green left ideologues are getting at their reserves, at their savings. First, they lose their money, then their jobs, then their pensions, and in the end, they are impoverished. Unfortunately, it is not science that wins, but the realization that climate protection literally makes poor, or to put it in the words of Bertolt Brecht, first comes food, then morals. And it is bad, very bad, that it had to come to this. Let's take a look at the climate conference in Dubai. Almost 100,000 visitors came there, and they all had only one goal: to get as much as possible from the giant cake that was perhaps being distributed there. But they were disappointed. The oil-rich state of Dubai celebrated a few trade fairs for renewable energies and promised those present. But in the long term, all the signatory states want to do without coal, oil, and gas. Even if this goal has yet to be achieved, it is a step forward and one of the most important decisions of the climate conference. But long-standing questions regarding financing remain open, including a lack of definition of climate financing and the adaptation of global financial flows to the Paris climate goal. Quote end, as Chairman Watch sadly tried to turn failure into success and then, even more disgruntled in Baku, a year later, and with only 40,000 visitors coming, as the ZDF second chairman channel, environmental reporter Andreas Stamm puts it, quote, "The fight against climate change did not win in Baku. All eyes are now on the next COP in Brazil next year. The process continues as does the climate crisis. Time will tell, they say. There's less and less time," unquote. And that's also because the Azerbaijani leader describes oil and gas as a gift from God. And the Spiegel knew how to report, quote, "Ilham Aliyev accuses the media and climate activists of defamation. Accusing us of having oil is like accusing us of Baku having more than 250 sunny days a year," unquote. Yes, that's the way it is. And only the hard-boiled communist UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "Pledges must quickly become cash." Well, he can wait a long time because the socialists are slowly running out of other people's money, as Maggie Thatcher so aptly put it. The failure of COP22 should come as no surprise. That's how explained it James Hansen. The Paris Agreement is really a scam, a fake. It's just nonsense when they say we have a 2% warming target and then try to get better every 5 years, unquote. These are just worthless words. There are no actions, only promises. As long as fossil fuels appear to be the cheapest fuels, they will continue to be burned, now, unquote. And not only at the BRICS summit in Kazan, but there too it was formulated, quote, that their domestic energy needs and economic well-being will take precedence over international climate agreements, such as the Paris Agreement and net zero initiatives, unquote. All these global conferences therefore show the decline of this region. Whether the USA withdraws from the Paris Agreement and again gives priority to its own energy supply, in particular to fossil fuels, drill oil, and wants to build 200 new nuclear power plants by 2050, or whether Argentina withdraws its delegates from Baku. The decline is unstoppable. Unfortunately, this does not apply to one region, the EU, with Germany as its flagship. To be German is to do something for its own sake, as Richard Wagner knew. Because although the current government in this country ultimately fell apart because the Federal Constitutional Court prohibited the misappropriation of the climate fund in the amount of 60 billion euros, all borrowed money, of course, and therefore the 2025 budget cannot be met without abandoning the debt brake. The climate religion, the climate ideology, is ultimately responsible. It makes energy prohibitively expensive, and with its octopus arms, it encompasses the entire economy and paralyzes it. And when even the climate-convinced Hans-Werner Sinn stated, the core problem is extremism in climate policy. Even though he has been warning against this climate policy for a long time, he thinks international climate policy is really quite great, which speaks volumes. But maybe science will win now, because the costs for those who have to bear them are becoming too great. Because the West in particular, and within the EU and Germany, are still pushing this nonsense further and further, albeit with decreasing intensity, as the USA, Argentina, and some other states show. The EU, with its great Green Deal, including a ban on combustion engines and much more, will be the last to give in. And only when Germany stops paying can no longer pay. And therefore, I stay at the end. Anyone who talks about climate protection wants to cheat. Vielen Dank.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Michael Limburg.
Ja, vielen Dank, Dr. Michael Limburg.
I think you have to switch the channel, translator. Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Limburg, Vice President of EICE, European Institute of Climate and Energy, pointing out that climate policies are the exact opposite of what we want to create. Climate policies and energy transition create scarcity and poverty, not abundance and productive labor. So it's a new Malthusian policy and really a mortal enemy of the great projects of the Global South that we are pushing forward. So we still have I think we have one presentation by Professor Glenn Diesen, and then we have a panel of agricultural experts. If you have questions, you can use the chat room in the Zoom, or you can send them to the email address questions@schillerinstitute.org. We will pick them up. We will have enough time for a Q&A session when the round of presentations have ended. I just also want to give a shout out to a couple of meetings, people who have gathered together to watch this conference, including one in Washington, D.C. with 7 or 8 people, in the Bronx with 12 people, and in the Mexican Journalist Club with at least 15 people. You're very welcome to this conference. So the next presentation will be by the renowned Professor Glenn Diesen of Norway at the University of Southeast Norway. He is an author also of a book that was published this year, The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order. I think many of you know him from a recent exchange with the Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Valdai Club. But we're very thrilled to hear your presentation.
My talk today is primarily about the global majority or the global south being able to provide some solutions for the great challenges ahead. Because my main assumption or thesis is that the West and Russia, we've been locked into a conflict in which attracts most of the attention of the world. And this is effectively a conflict where there's no solutions, winner takes all, and we therefore see that both sides are prepared to take great risks, given that there's no acceptable plan B. And so I think it's worth looking at how we got to this point, but also why I think it has to be the rest of the world, again, the so-called Global South, who provide some solutions. Because within the security framework now, and it's not limited to Ukraine, we also look in the Middle East, but also towards East Asia, everything is becoming defined more and more in terms of a zero-sum game. It's obviously also noteworthy that no one's speaking really of peace anymore, about compromise, mutual understanding. All of these things now belong to the past. And I think a lot of this is simply because there's no alternative ideas out there, and effectively everything is seen to be on the line. So at the core of this, I think it's important to appreciate some of the panic which is currently in the West, especially in the war against Russia, in which especially Europeans bet everything on the idea that the Russians could be defeated somewhat quickly. And we've done some very extraordinary things. We haven't really had any dissent either, which is quite remarkable if you think about the idea of now directly attacking the world's largest nuclear power, boycotting all diplomacy for 3 years, not even being able to define what victory means without sparking a nuclear war. All of this has been pursued without any dissent at all, without both politically, but also within the intellectual space, the journalists, academics, everyone has more or less toed the line. And it's quite an extraordinary time in history. Now, so it's worth noting how we got here, and again, also then why the Global South is most likely to have the solution. Now, after the Cold War, within the West, everyone embraced more or less Fukuyama's idea of the end of history, this idea of perpetual peace, in which the world would unite under Western leadership. They would adopt our norms, our values, and again, this would be the source of peace for perpetuity. Now, our entire political class over the next couple of decades, they grew up in this system under this ideology, if you will, convinced about this liberal dream. And this is also why there's been a lack of dissent. It was very hard to argue for anything else. This idea that we could do politics in an entirely new way, we're going to be value-based, not fall into the great power politics of the past. So everyone assumed there was one pathway without any disruptions, and suddenly it has all begun to fall apart. I think we see now the alternative to what we thought was going to be the system going forward. We see the alternative as being more chaos, anarchy, unpredictable rival powers, which do not necessarily have our values. And obviously Russia is seen as the main manifestation of this, the source of most problems. Although all the challenges to multipolarity, that is one center of power, is viewed as a threat. So even if we take Russia out of the equation, we nonetheless believe now that China would be the principal threat, simply because it is the main economic power and rival to the United States. And again, one has to stop for a second and think about some of the insanity behind this, because if you look at the Chinese stories over the past decades, it's been a remarkable story. It's been the most exceptional economic rise in history, and they did it all without dominating or through domination or through conquest. And irrespective of this very peaceful rise, the US and its European allies seem now prepared to confront it, convince themselves that the rise of China is something unacceptable, simply because it disrupts the whole world, which we were promised would last after the Cold War. So we've gone from this era of utopia and perpetual peace to complete uncertainty, being swept away by this idea that we are destined for new conflict. And some even take comfort in this, the idea of a new Cold War, that this would be a good thing, because we remember the first Cold War, in which you had the West consisted of thriving democracies, we had the most competitive economies, and there was a sense of moral authority and also a big confidence, and also a large extent of internal cohesion. Of course, the whole concept of a Cold War, I think, is deluding us more than helping us as a concept, simply because none of these are no longer the real. We've exhausted a lot of our democracies. If you look what's happening from the US, Germany, France, this is very undemocratic decisions being made almost on a daily basis. We're not economically competitive anymore. The Americans discovered they can't diversify away from China, but China can diversify away from them. And the Europeans similarly discovered that Russia can diversify away from us, but we can't diversify away from Russia. So the idea of fighting another Cold War, it's definitely, I think, the wrong path. So my point is simply that the West isn't wicked necessarily. I think it's just lacking any political imagination at the time. Obviously, we can't listen to the Russians, given the animosity that built up over the couple of last years. And our own leaders at the moment are spewing a lot of nonsense. I think they are completely committed to narratives. And these narratives continue to distance themselves more and more from reality, especially as we're losing the economic war against China and we're losing the proxy war against the Russians. So it paints a very bleak picture of what's ahead. Now, the reason why I think, therefore, that the global majority or the rest of the world has the solution is because no one else is currently present to present a more optimistic view of the world. Obviously, we don't have one, and when we look at the Russians, irrespective of what they say, we convinced ourselves that they're a new Soviet Union, but they might not have any intentions or capabilities to dominate the way they did in the past. But again, the reality does not affect our narrative that to such a great extent anymore. So I think there's a huge need at the moment to see the global majority beginning to formulate a more optimistic view of the world that's coming into being. That is a multipolar world. One in which multipolar distribution of power is not seen as a threat, but indeed it should be seen as an amazing opportunity. As again, for the first time in history now, we have the opportunity to really connect everything from the Atlantic to the Pacific, this huge Eurasian continent with Europe and Asia coming together. We have new technologies which can solve a lot of the problems of the past. And we can finally overcome some of these alliance systems which plagued us through the Cold War. So instead of seeking refuge by returning to the alliance systems, we have an opportunity again to overcome them. And we've seen what the global majority has been able to do with institutions such as BRICS, and also with the Chinese seeking to overcome alliance systems by pushing for peace between the Iranians and Saudis, or even what we see now with the economic connectivity, assisting in bringing even China and India closer together. So I often cite Adam Smith because he actually wrote about this and hoped that at one point in time we could have more equal distribution of wealth around the world. And this was not something that should be feared, but something we should aspire to, because what we're doing now is not just bad for the West, but also bad for the entire world. So we see the US exhausting itself. It's incentivizing collective balancing. In Europe, they're not diversifying their economic ties, which is required for prosperity and political autonomy. Instead, we see them now connect themselves solely with the United States. Subsequently, they're seeing economic decline, political subordination, and irrelevance. So if we want to solve a lot of the problems in the world, overcoming alliance systems, all these wars which derive from unipolar dominance, these forever wars, and huge migration as a result of these wars into Europe, a lot of these problems could be solved. And this is some of the great opportunities we have with this multipolar system which is emerging. So again, I urge the global majority to take some of the leadership in terms of formulating a positive view of the future.
I'm sorry. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Professor Glenn Diesen, professor at the University of Southeast Norway. We are coming to our final presentation, which is an expert panel on agricultural issues. And I would like to read all of the presenters in one, and then we'll have the complete video, I believe. It's Dr. Bedabrata Pine, I hope I'm not butchering your name, from India, a film director, former NASA senior research scientist. Joe Maxwell from the United States, co-founder of Farm Action and a former lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri. Then we have Mike Callicrate, also from the US, owner of Ranch Foods Direct and Callicrate Cattle Company. And last but not least, we have Robert Baker, Schiller Institute Agriculture Commission of the US. We're looking forward to your video.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Schiller Institute and Helge LaRouche for allowing me to speak on this movie Deja Vu. It's a documentary on the market reforms in agriculture in the US and how it has impacted small farmers. And this was done in the backdrop of the huge protest that the Indian farmers had launched against similar reforms in India. I'm sure you would get to see the movie at some point of time, and I'm very excited that two of the people that we interviewed would be speaking after me here. So I'll tell you very briefly about what the documentary is about. It's about market reforms in agriculture and how, as a result, corporates have taken over farming and has decimated small farmers and bringing no benefit to the consumers. In fact, the issues are much bigger than farming itself. It talks about how corporate monopolies, the oligarchies and the cartels have taken over our lives in every sphere of our lives. And the important thing is that there's not a single problem in the world that can be sorted out today or can be resolved in the favor of people without putting the corporate monopolies in their place, without curbing their powers. That's the main thing that we want to talk about, and I'm sure we would have an opportunity to talk about it more. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation to be here today. The path to peace is food sovereignty. The United States globalization policies has left the U.S. having to depend on other countries to feed its people. The United States faces a record agricultural trade deficit of about $45 billion this year. The truth is, the U.S. globalist policies have pushed the mighty U.S. agricultural powerhouse into a position where it can't even feed its people. The world should strive to create a place, a community where the farmers and producers of a country are allowed to and supported to feed their neighbors through local and regional food systems, with the governments around the world standing ready to give a hand to feed others in the case of drought or other natural disasters that disrupt their ability to feed their own people. When any country is reliant on another country to feed them and their people, they have lost their sovereignty, leaving their people subject to the heavy hand of the globalist and subjecting themselves to starvation unless they submit to globalization. We should not allow food to ever be used as a weapon. We should never allow food to be controlled in the hands of a few global corporations and their allied governments. This conference brings together speakers from some of the world's most powerful global countries. Countries that are investing in infrastructure around the world in South America, Africa, other places. They're building railroads and ports and roads and different types of infrastructure within these countries. That should be applauded. However, most of them are selling those countries a message that they're there to help. It's our opinion that their motives are not pure. They only invest in infrastructure their corporations, government-owned businesses, and wealthiest citizens need to extract the wealth out of those very countries that they claim they came to help. It is as we say out in the countryside in the U.S., it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Farmers across the globe should be demanding that they be allowed to support their neighbors by feeding their neighbors, that their governments should invest in the processing and distribution systems that support a local and regional economy. If you want to really grow wealth in any community, then it should start with agriculture and feeding that community. This approach will build wealth within the community and within that country. As a farmer, I am working in the United States with our organization, Farm Action and Farm Action Fund, to demand that the U.S. allow me as a farmer, allow us as American farmers to feed our neighbors, and asking and demanding that they provide the infrastructure to other countries so that those farmers in those countries can feed their neighbors. We want our government, our U.S. government, to respect the wishes of the people in other places around the world. An example of something that we have been just shocked at our country is when the country of Mexico said that they wanted to ban genetically modified corn, and our government demanded that they not have that right. Our government in the United States should never second guess what is best for another country and its people. We should support those decisions and provide opportunity for peaceful ways to negotiate and have trade. You know, in our opinion at Farm Action, we can never have world peace unless we all work together to empower communities worldwide to feed themselves. I want to thank you so much for all coming together to advance our desire to lift up people all around the globe. Thank you.
Hi, this is Mike Callicrate. I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I want to thank the Schiller Institute and Helga for this opportunity to present today. The thing that I am really most worried about is concentration of power and wealth in the hands of a few. President James Madison, 1809 to 1817, said, "Concentrated wealth will destroy our nation unless the laws change. The day will come when our republic will be an impossibility because wealth will be concentrated in the hands of a few. When that day comes, we must rely upon the wisdom of the best elements in the country to readjust the laws of the nation." And since this quote from President Madison was made, we've gone up and down. We've gone through the robber baron era of monopoly power and control. We're back again fully under the monopoly power and control of global corporations and globalists in general that are really pitting man against man. And if we want to talk about, brethren and everyone becoming brethren, I think we can maybe do that around food as a possibility. And what I work on is the building local regional food systems. So I can know that we're going to be able to eat. But right now, unless we can change our food system and control the big corporations like the Cargills of the world that go search the world for the hungriest people that'll work the cheapest and extract the resources of the planet, pitting others against men and creating war as a result, then we're never going to be able to really have a peaceful existence. So I focus on food. I want to build local regional food systems. And I go back to what St. Paul said, the husbandman that laboreth must be the first partaker of the fruits. That's inscribed in stone above the USDA building, above the main portico of the USDA building in Washington, D.C. Yet those in that building that conduct the work of USDA don't know it's there and honestly don't believe in it. So I don't know what this new administration is going to bring us. The last time this administration with Trump at the head was in charge, things only got worse. But we'll have to see what happens in this next administration. So thank you very much for having me on today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. The first thing I want to do is have you look at the screen and write down the website for EIR News Service, www.larouchepub.com. Then go to the archive and type in agriculture and the American system and read the hundreds of articles written on the history of the economic battle to understand the difference between colonial monopoly-controlled economics and sovereign citizens control. This is very important. This is your go-to resource. Today, there are two world food and farm patterns that are a call to action and a new economic system. First, the world's total food output is not enough. Many decent people say there's enough food, it just needs to be distributed better. That's not true. To take the grain as a measure, take the corn, the wheat, the rice, the sorghum, take all of it. We should have over 6 billion tons a year, and we barely have half of that. And look closer, those nations growing more grain are India, Russia, China, and a few others. That's good. But in Africa, we have a crash need to increase grain output and elsewhere. The Western grain belts are in economic crisis and going nowhere. Secondly, we need to roll back the long-distance export-import supply lines set up by the globalist system, set up by monopolies like Cargill, JBS, Bunge, ADM, Danone, Walmart, Aldi, Carrefour, You can go on and on. Why monopolies? To make money, not to produce food. Today, the U.S. is a net importer of food. We're living off cartel shipments of food from Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, and many others. The U.S. farm states now are like Europe. There are mass layoffs in farm supply companies. John Deere is shutting down factories. Cargill is laying off 8,000 workers, and along with many food processors like Tyson's, they're cutting thousands of jobs. In the next 20 years, 70% of U.S. farmers will retire. Young farmers are not coming back. On this panel, we've heard about the projects and approach to turn this all around. The principles involved are on record with the American system of economics. Look at Abraham Lincoln's Transcontinental Railroad in 1862. Now, let's bring on the South American Transcontinental Railroad. It's long overdue. Let's increase production everywhere. Let's look at 3 points that are principles for a new economic system in terms of agriculture. 1, we need family-scale independent farms. Why? To develop creative skills, culture, we need to have the creativity, and the family farm needs to have steady and reliable pricing. 2, we need to maintain infrastructure to support food production, like water, power, transportation, railroads. And 3, we need to maintain the sovereignty of the nation. It's the role of government to stop monopolies and financial complexes that are dominating farming, the food supply, medicine, and everything. Already this fall, farmers are on the streets in Europe again. They're protesting. They hit London November 19th. Last week, the French farmers demonstrated. They are demanding the right, get this, to produce food. We saw the Indian farmers on the streets en masse. We just heard the American farmers' reports. So let's take the moral authority of commitment to provide everyone on earth plenty of food. Thank you.
Thank you, all of us, to the combined panel that we've just heard. That was Dr. Bidabrata Payne, Joe Maxwell, Mike Callicrate, and Bob Baker. What we will do now is we will watch a trailer of Mr. Payne's video. He undertook a 6,000+ mile journey across the Midwestern US to document the lives of American farmers. I think this movie is from 2022 or so. I would like to show you the trailer. The movie is called Deja Vu, and it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Year 2020. Hundreds of thousands of farmers converged at the capital city of India, protesting the controversial farm laws, the largest such sit-in protest the world has witnessed in recent times. These laws were to usher in full-fledged market reforms in agriculture. Well, it turns out that some 4 decades ago, American farming was also opened up.
Under this bill, farmers will be eased into a market-oriented policy. The solution is to get government out of the way and let farmers compete.
So 4 of us, 4 Indians, set out on a 10,000-kilometer journey into the heartland of America. We wanted to find out who benefited from these reforms, who lost out.
Yeah, I went through the bankruptcy because I had massive debt.
We had to sell our dairy herd in 2018 because we were no longer making enough money.
We sell grain oftentimes in the United States as a farmer for less than it takes to produce it.
Well, we used to have 10 million farmers in the United States. We're down to less than 2 million. I mean, we have more prisoners than farmers in the United States now.
Who knows how many farmers committed suicide, but
accidents. So the wives would get the insurance money.
How did we get here?
I would always say, well, I'm from the future. I've seen what happens when the same kind of policy that you're being told is going to be good for you. I can tell you what happens.
Thank you very much for the trailer of Dr. Bida Barata Payne's movie Deja Vu, where the past meets the future. And I've become very curious about it, and I wonder if we can actually also promote it or watch it and then promote it, because I think it's very instructive. So I think that was it for our presentations. We'll move on to the question and answers period. Let's bring on the panel. We have, we have Dennis Small, we have Dr. Alexander Bobrov, we have Bob Baker, Joe Maxwell, and Mike Callicrate. Michael Limburg, he wanted to stay on, but his internet connection, unfortunately, was not good enough. And Professor Glenn Diesen was unable to stay on, but he will be on tomorrow's panel 3. So if you have questions to Professor Glenn Diesen, we can also discuss them here, but we can also forward them to him for tomorrow's panel. So let's get into it. Dennis, do you have you reviewed most of the presentations so far, and what are your thoughts?
Well, just to get the ball rolling with some of the questions that may have come in, let me make a brief comment or two. I'd like to pick up on one of the points that Dr. Alexander Bobrov emphasized in his presentation on the crisis of diplomacy, where he said that to revive diplomacy, we have to understand the common interests between ourselves and others. We have to walk in other people's shoes. Now, I think that points to in the direction of the central issue, which is there have to be those common interests. And there are, in a world of growth, in a world of development, in a world where sovereignty among nation states is respected, which is the Westphalian world, where you have a total rejection of that fundamental policy, as in Henry Kissinger's outright rejection of Westphalia, and you have instead the idea of the Hobbesian world of war of each against all, or dog eat dog, or lose-lose, as it has also been characterized, then you run into a fundamental problem. And to be able to reestablish the kind of diplomacy that's required, the underlying principles that establish that kind of common interest have got to come front and center. I think that what Professor Limburg pointed to in part of his very amusing and I think well-focused presentation was his emphasis that the policy behind the extremist version of climate change is the policy of the Club of Rome. And he mentioned in particular Dr. Alexander King. Now, the Club of Rome's view is exactly the Hobbesian view, that there are limited resources, the economy is not going to grow, and so there is no basis for diplomacy. It's entirely a question of the law of the jungle. The stronger will prevail. And it's not accidental that Dr. Alexander King, like Aurelio Peccei, and like many of the leading luminaries of the Club of Rome with their Malthusian outlook, were actually joined at the hip, integrally related to the NATO structure. The Club of Rome and NATO are essentially the same outlook and the same central organization. Because to be able to have a world of collapsing physical economies, of a dog-eat-dog world, of the Hobbesian view, you clearly need a Leviathan, a unipolar world, a power like NATO to impose those views. So I think that if we take a look at that, and then in that broad strategic outlook include what we heard just now about agriculture in the United States, and if people recall that one graph I showed of food production in Mexico, with the utter collapse of the basic staples of the Mexican diet, I think it locates the discussion in terms of the necessary kinds of fundamental changes that are needed in the development architecture and the security architecture to be able to resume the kind of world in which diplomacy is actually possible. Because if there is not a common interest, then diplomacy is simply going to turn into what NATO considers diplomacy, which is military dominance. So I would put that out just as a first comment on some of what I heard and to get the ball rolling on the discussion.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Bobrov, do you want to directly answer? This was also directed to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I do agree with Mr. Small about the fact that many Western politicians and diplomats are trying to promote a kind of world vision whereby the most aggressive and countries are trying just to eat the fabled one. And I do remember these words of the former European Union leader, Josep Borrell, who said that Europe is a kind of a vibrant garden, the one that is encircled by the jungle. At the same time, I believe that this is not the way how the 21st century must exist, especially in a multipolar system, because it is up to the biggest, up to the strongest country to safeguard the principles of international law that provide equal rights and equal opportunities for nations large and small. And diplomacy is all about trying to find a consensus between different countries. Moreover, we will never see any conflict which would be symmetric. It means that the kind of conflict that will bring together two equal countries. There are no equal countries. Every 193 countries, they are absolutely different, which is why mitigating different conflicts is very important. Secondly, what I'm trying to say is that diplomacy is a tool of a state, and we live in a state-centric system. And those people who are trying to introduce a new era of post-Westphalian or before Westphalian principles, they are trying to eliminate states as the main actors in international arena, which is also very dangerous because we do see what happens when different states crumble, because the political vacuum is filled with different terrorist organizations, which also entices different flows of illegal migration, the flow of illicit drug trafficking, and so on and so forth. And we are holding this discussion, by the way, amid a very tragic and dramatic events that are now unfolding in Syria. And I already read many articles in the West and in Russia blaming our country for the fact that for all these years, Russia were trying to promote and to safeguard the Assad regime, whereas many US politicians kept on reiterating that Bashar al-Assad should go. But I believe that it was an erroneous perception of what Russia was trying to explain to the rest of the world. We were not trying to safeguard regime per se. We were trying to safeguard the statehood of Syria, irrespective of the person who will be the head of this country. Because if we will see Syrian statehood just in lying in tatters, it will unleash dire repercussions for the entire region. For Iran, for Turkey, for Russia, for entire Middle East, because it will the whole political power vacuum will be filled by terrorists, and that's why we will see the flow of different migrants going in the direction of Europe or to Russia or to other stable countries. That's why this idea that there are stronger countries who are trying to eat fabled countries is so erroneous, because we live in a global village. We're interdependent. So if there is something happening and going on in one country, it will result to the rest of the world. And that's why we have to work collectively, work together with all kind of new and classical threats and challenges that we are facing. That's why we have to work together. And this is diplomacy is all about.
If I understood it correctly, then Bob, Joe, and Mike were also witnessing the entire panel. Does any one of you, in whatever order, have anything to add or make some remarks and comments to what you've heard?
Let me go first if I could. What Dr. Bobrov just said, and I enjoyed the other panelists and appreciate what each one of them had to say. But what Dr. Bobrov just said about a place or a country being encircled by the jungle, and one of the things that we've done with local regional food system development, in my case, it's Ranch Foods Direct, and we've been around 24 years, and it's a very, very difficult thing to do, to build a food system when the jungle, the monopolies surround you. And they go out and they do all they can to damage you and to hurt you and to destroy your ability to connect with the consumer, giving them a better product at a better value. And it just made me think that's really what's going on with local regional food system development. Unless we do like Beto said, and control the monopoly and the monopoly power of these corporations, it's going to be very, very difficult to do. And so what I've decided with Ranch Foods Direct, let's just go home and make our community as good as we can, and surround it really around agriculture and food production as being that main source of wealth creation, and then just keep as much of it here as we possibly can. And in the meantime, promote policy that corporations become less powerful and monopolies are broken up. And so that's what we're hoping for. And one of the things that Joe does with Farm Action, and I work with as well with Joe and Angela and that group, is bringing attention to this problem of monopoly power and concentrated wealth. And again, I'm ready to get out of the jungle, and I'm ready to be not surrounded by the jungle. So thank you.
Bob Baker, do you have anything to add, or?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, it's very important discussion because, like Mike said, when you get discussing food, you're right at the foundation of what we're trying to keep everyone alive with. And, when you look back at when our nation was founded, what we took on, we fought a revolution to get rid of the policies, economic policies, that our nation is now enveloped in, and what Mike and Joe and Beto have talked about in terms of the monopolies. And our founding fathers, especially with Hamilton, set up a credit system and the directionality to build improvements, to build infrastructure, water canals and railroads. And those ideas were watched by countries all over the world, including in particular Germany, where people that worked with Hamilton, Friedrich List, went to Germany, and Germany transformed with that kind of policy, building infrastructure. And then you jump into Abraham Lincoln. He got right back on what was technically called the American system of economics, of physical development, and launched the Transcontinental Railroad. He launched the Homestead Act of 1862, and that brought in all kinds of farmers from countries all over the world into the Midwest and development, and set up an infrastructure program around the new communities, around the railroads. And then, from that, from Lincoln's various discussions, the Tsar of Russia looked at that, and he started transforming the way the Russian agriculture was controlled by feudal lords and big landed estates, and also worked together to build the Siberian Railroad. So then you jump into Franklin Roosevelt. In the middle of the Depression, he went back to the American system again, went on the radio and declared a moratorium on all farm foreclosures, and within a year they had all the bad debt refinanced without a computer. And he moved into other things in terms of building the TVA, which became a model to the world infrastructure. And it was through people that followed that many other people, like the first president of China, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, his greatest hero was Abraham Lincoln. He studied all the American system, and when he became the first president of China, he started to infuse that whole discussion into the various networks there. And we see that in other countries, Japan also. So this is a rich reservoir, and that's why at the introduction of my speech, I recommended people search the archive, because we've got just tremendous material and research we've done that just pops out at you about the history of this battle between the old empire families and the idea of everybody kind of being a serf versus the idea of people being sovereign owner operators of all kinds of business, and the kind of pride and cultural development that comes around that. So I just want to put that into the discussion.
Yeah, very good. Last but not least, Joe, do you want to say something now?
I think to the point that I'd made earlier, I'm a person that has great distrust. I have distrust of the various governments that are now the economic leaders of the world. I have distrust because I see the concentration of the wealth within those countries. Here we have our monopolists, you have the oligarchs, you have others that are government owned or public cooperated in with government owned. I am very concerned about the world. Share the concerns of the Schiller Institute. We're on the verge of some of the most tragic, potentially most tragic wartimes that the world has ever seen. But yet I don't see any of our economic leaders in the world stepping forward to truly negotiate in good faith a peace. Our position as an organization is that we should all at least come together and not weaponize food. We should all strive to ensure, as a world, as leaders, we should at least agree, whoever wins the economic battle and puts the most $1 billion into their government state treasuries, well, okay. But we all ought to agree that all of us have a responsibility to provide the infrastructure, the assistance, so that each community and each country can have the sovereignty that producing your own food gives you. And that should be a baseline for all of our work, regardless of the other differences that we might have.
Absolutely. Self-sufficiency in food is, I think, one of the main pillars of sovereignty. I would like to bring up a question that came in, and it's about basically one of the issues that we've discussed about the US economy, the question of retooling the industry, especially the military-industrial complex. If we are creating the credit, to transform the American economy so that it can build the machine tools and whatever parts are needed to rebuild the global South, that is not an easy task, according to the questioner. It's Jean Nichols from Llano, New Mexico, and I think it's a she, right? Jean Nichols says, since it appears the whole US economy is dependent on the military-industrial financial complex, and so many politicians are becoming enriched by the weapons manufacturers, the US is not going to easily give up their warmongering or at all without some extraordinary incentive that would still prop up the stock market, etc., and allow US to maintain its economic narrative. Can the arms manufacturers be offered contracts to produce parts for renewables or be paid not to produce, such as sometimes farmers are giving subsidies to not grow? Or what other ideas can combat US greed and the war economy? Let's start with Dennis and then go around the other presenters. Thank you.
Well, you can't prop up the stock market. If you try to do that, the entire human race is going to die in thermonuclear war. It's as simple as that. The stock market bubble in the United States, as around the rest of the world, is only one component, and by no means the biggest one, of a financial bubble, excuse me, a financial bubble of over $2 quadrillion. If you try to keep that afloat, if that is your measure of value, money, then the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And that's what's happening right now. That's why LaRouche emphasized in the very opening remarks that we heard today before the first panel, that the fundamental problem affecting society today is the issue of not distinguishing between money and actual value. So don't start off by trying to defend the value of the stock market and find something to replace this siphoning off of wealth, which is what the military, industrial, financial complex is all about, with something that otherwise siphons off wealth to keep Wall Street and the City of London happy. The military, industrial, financial complex does two things. First, it serves as a military instrument, clearly, for imposing this unipolar world. Secondly, the budget of about $1 trillion a year goes to the largest defense contractors, like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and others. And from there, it goes to the principal investment houses that are the main stockholders in those companies. So that's how it's siphoned out of the American population through these defense contractors. Oh, of course, the directors make, a couple of million or a couple of billion here and there, but that's small change compared to $2 quadrillion in a speculative bubble. And that goes to Wall Street and the City of London. Now, what you do have in the so-called military-industrial complex, as the questioner was saying, is you have a base of machine tool capabilities and industrial production, which, if retooled, that is to say, if it is repurposed and rechanneled into actually productive investment, which is defined along the lines that LaRouche specified of being able to do the good, increasing the potential relative population density of our country and of the entire world, then that capability and the jobs associated with it can be maintained and strengthened. We need huge numbers of tractors for the world. We don't need tanks. We may need some. There does have to be some sort of a defense budget. But we've estimated that you could easily cut it in half, and I venture to say probably more than that, and still serve the legitimate defense needs of the United States. But you repurpose that capability, and above all, the skilled workers associated with it, the machinists, the people who are actually experts in production, you repurpose that for the purpose of supplying the needs of a growing United States industrial base, which as well is satisfying the needs of the entire development projects around the world. Now, let me turn that briefly on its head, because we have to look at this also from the standpoint of what is going on in the thinking in the global South. I mean, I talked at the beginning about $1 trillion for defense, $1 trillion for interest rates, $1 trillion for the drug trade, or $1 trillion spent to build the 46,000 kilometers of China's rail system, which, by the way, is going up to 50 next year, and after that to 70. But there's another $1 trillion, which was mentioned by the economist Zhang Weiwei in his remarks, which is the amount that has been invested productively through the Belt and Road Initiative over a 10-year lifespan. And with that, what has happened is that millions of people, approximately 40 million people, have been raised out of poverty, and hundreds of thousands of jobs, if not millions of jobs, have been created. So it's not the money that's invested. The point is the credit system. You have to have credit, which is issued with a purpose, with a moral purpose, because the scientific purpose and the moral purpose is one and the same thing. And the way you solve the border problem in the United States is you don't build a wall, or if you do build a wall, it's got to be between Wall Street and the productive economy. I mean, if President Trump wants to build a wall, that's great, but build it where it belongs, between speculation and actual production. And I have to say that I think that President Trump's remarks about the dollar and imposing sanctions on any country that break with it, well, I would agree with what President Putin said, is that one thing is to explicitly renounce the dollar and break with it. The other is to be forced into a corner, which is what has happened with the developing sector generally, which is that the dollar has been weaponized. But let me emphasize this point. The Wall Street speculative dollar, the one that's behind $2 quadrillion in financial instruments, has been weaponized not only against Russia and Iran and Africa and Mexico. It has been weaponized against the United States of America as well. That is not our national currency. Our national currency is the dollar based on production, issued as credit of Franklin Roosevelt, of Lincoln, of Hamilton, of Washington, and so on. So I think that if we start from that standpoint, we can see why it is that the Global South is talking about having a unit of account. You could call it a currency if you like, but a unit of account that serves them as the basis, not for speculation, but simply for denominating investments that they intend to make as part of this whole process unleashed by the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's why it's so important for them, understandably, to put a wall or a barrier between a speculative part of the economy and the physical economic part. So I think that's really the crucial question. Let's apply that concept domestically, and we can apply it internationally, and the entire basis for international relations will be changed fundamentally.
Right. Dr. Bobrov, do you want to reply to this from your Russian perspective? I mean,
yeah, thank you so much.
go ahead.
I would like to say that I'm not an expert on the US economy, but I have a firsthand experience of witnessing what actually happens to countries and peoples who fall prey to the US military interventions. Though being Russian, I was born in Tripoli, Libya, where my father used to work for decades as a Russian diplomat. And I do remember the events of 2011, right in the wake of the Arab Spring, what happened to Libya when it fell prey to NATO's intervention, the one that Barack Obama's administration was leading from behind. I do remember this exclamation of Hillary Clinton, who said that we saw he dead, referring to the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, and what actually happened to the country, which is now lies in ruins. Its economy is in tatters, and people were forced into migration to Italy and to Europe and even to Germany, by the way. Now I live in Russia, and Russia is amid the conflict with Ukraine. And part of my family, they actually come from the Donbas region, the city of Kharkiv, the one that is on the border between Russia and Ukraine, from the village, which is now possessed by the Russian military. And I do remember all these well, I would say stories about what was going on in the World War II with different Western troops that were stationed near the city of Kharkiv and how they actually massacred people. And now we see the same now in the 21st century with the very same militaries being present on the Russian soil. I see what is going on with the Atacams, Storm Shadows, with their missile shots into the mainland Russia. And this is something that just looks like the Caribbean crisis or what was going on in the 1970s and the 1980s. So I see that this story keeps on repeating itself. And I believe that diplomacy is all about bringing to an end all these conflicts, the one that US military complex is culpable for. It isn't only about Russia, it's not about Libya. We can say we can apply this system also to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to former Yugoslavia, to many other regions. And I really hope that the Donald Trump administration will follow suit of his first presidency of not intervening into regional different conflicts, because this will make at least our world safer and more prosperous, if you wish. Thank you.
I actually have a question that has come up from Mary Jane Freeman. And she said, I should ask the farmers on this panel, if you have a portion of the $1 trillion Dennis Small began with, What would you build to transform the US and the world agriculture to feed the world? Specifically, what would you build? Who wants to start? Anyone? Mike?
Yeah.
Calculate. I think you have to unmute.
I believe that we need to make our agricultures more meat centered, livestock centered. We got a lot of land that is in corn and soybeans, growing corn to put in cars to produce high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated vegetable oils that are seriously making us sick. And I'm suggesting those acres get put back to grass. That from a climate perspective, that's a smart thing to do. But we've got to make meat more of the center of our diet, in my view. And so what I would do is I would build out a lot more local regional processing of livestock and build public markets where the people in those markets, the makers, the butcher, the baker, the brewer, the distiller, the creamery, all those people that make up that local food system have a place, a safe place to do business, and perhaps make them owners, like a condominium complex, make them owners in those markets under an agreed set of rules that you're going to buy local, you're going to support the economy, and you're not going to become one of those extractors, one of those financialization people that Dennis just described that live on Wall Street. And so that's what I would do with it. But on the other thing I would do is I would make sure that those are supported from the government. I mean, the government buys a lot of food. They buy a lot of meat in particular. So why is the government buying from JBS, the biggest meat packer on the planet, that lies, cheats, steals, bribes, and with owners with prison sentences? How in the world do they justify buying from those companies when all these small companies that were supported during COVID with grant money and so forth are dying because they can't sell their ground beef, they can't sell their trim, they don't have market access? We've thrown billions of dollars of money out there to build this local regional food system infrastructure, and it's failed because it's never been supported by the government itself, either from purchasing from these plants in a priority basis, or in enforcing the antitrust laws, which would keep them alive and keep the predators away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
If I might just.
Sure, go ahead.
I think that that would be the dream state, right? To be able to have access to that type of capital. I think that the first thing for investment is not farmers across the world are in different places, different spaces, different economic circumstances. So I do think that just one plan meets it all. I would focus first on Africa and some regions in South America. And there's other places in the world. Some of the investments that the West has put into Africa has only further entrapped and impoverished the local farmer. I think the investments need to be made on a local, not unlike what Mike said as it relates to the U.S., but needs to be made in building wealth through agriculture, through the processing, distribution within a local and regional food system. I think farmers need to have investments. We worked with Beto and strongly supported the farmers in India. I'm setting on 752 acres. In India, the farmer is setting on 1.5 hectares. So I think we have to, but the investment needs to be made first in building the infrastructure and supporting the farmer to be able to feed themselves and then their neighbors. Through that, we can build wealth. In the U.S., the investments need to be made to break away the power of the monopoly and restore it back, democratize the food system, restoring those systems of local regional food and stripping that power out of the hands of the globalists around the world. JBS that Mike mentioned is the largest protein company in the world. Their impact in the U.S., Tyson Foods, what we saw them extracting the wealth out of Eastern Europe. Oftentimes the folks that we talk about are the villains here, stripping us in the United States. They're the same people doing so around the world. And we need to invest in the local farmer, the local food systems, and strip those corporations of the hold that they have over us. Ultimately, the way to peace is to ensure everyone has sovereignty, at least food sovereignty.
Thank you so much. Bob, do you want to add something shortly? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we have a real shortage of farmers, let's say in the United States.
Right.
And we've discussed programs that we call 1 million new family farms. Now, a lot of people like that, but then they say, well, you know, that'll never happen. Well, it has happened. We've got a history of making that happen. I mean, you know, when you look at Lincoln's policies, how did he bring all those different families into the Midwest and launch farmers, businesses, and all the supporting businesses to support those farmers? And today we have about 1.8 million farmers, but you calculate about 8% of that 1 million, or 9% maybe. They're raising about close to 90% of the food. Now, that's not very many farmers. So what are the other 90% of the farmers raising? And then you find we have a lot of small farms that are no longer really farms. And you have a lot of farmers that must work 2 or more jobs off the farm just to subsidize the land and the losses they take in from the way agriculture is structured today. So when we think about how would we transform the situation, I mean, like Franklin Roosevelt, they set up county committees all over the nation, every county, elected by the people. And those committees were used to discuss how to improve the conditions at the local level, from like what you see behind me with contour farming and the kind of things that we should use the Extension Service and the USDA to help with. But the process is necessary. We've got a history of doing that. And you see, that history is the difference between the American system and the system we fought a revolution to get rid of around the old Dutch and British East India Company monopolies, which are now reintroduced and reconstituted around the big grain monopolies and monopolies in the industrial complexes wherever you go. So I think that's an idea that has a tremendous historical context, and I think it would create a tremendous excitement, especially but for the people even in the cities, because it's a real directionality to get back millions of financially viable family farms. And that means we've got to reconstruct the financial system, which we have to do anyway.
So I do have a question to Dr. Bobrov. Can you still stay on for a couple of minutes? I don't know what time it is at your end.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we have about 20, 25 minutes left for discussion. And there are actually 2 questions that came up for you. And one is from Bethany Johnson, a retired educator in Spain, who says, Professor Alexander Bobrov, I observe a huge lack of empathy amongst Western leaders and very few diplomats that can be respected. Question, how can this be corrected, if at all, in this existing globalist world of corruption and greed? Ukraine is a very good example. Thank you. And I would like to add another question which came in by someone called Rudyard, I guess. What does Mr. Bobrov think are the US special interests behind backing the Ukraine in continuing armed conflict?
Well, regarding the first question, I must say that unfortunately, when it comes to many colleagues of mine from American and European countries, they actually forget what diplomacy is all about. Because being a diplomat means being tolerant, being having empathy towards those who are not maybe your allies, but you still have to somehow bring together different countries and trying to understand what is their position, what is the grand strategy of their respective countries, and so on. So I believe that in many ways, European diplomats are becoming European politicians in the way that they are using a very belligerent rhetoric, not to somehow pacify any situation, but to foment any crisis or to drive a wedge between Europe and Russia in particular. So I don't actually consider people who are saying some belligerent, aggressive words against my country as diplomats per se. As for the US strategy behind Ukraine, I believe that it has to do with the fact that it was already expressed by President Biden, by his Foreign Secretary Blinken, when they said that they are trying to create a situation whereby Ukraine would be used as a leverage, as a weapon against Russia, an anti-Russia project, so that they could inflict on Russia a strategic defeat. And this is exactly what they're trying to do by fomenting this crisis and trying to do their utmost so that Ukraine would fight against Russia until their last soldier. And I believe that this is a very erroneous policy, and clearly Russia is trying to find a diplomatic way out of this situation. But Volodymyr Zelensky, the current Ukrainian president, he actually prohibited by issuing a decree any forms of negotiations with Russia. And the last attempt that was made by our diplomacy was in Istanbul back in March, April 2022, where we already created a draft of the final resolution of this conflict, and it was actually the then British Prime Minister Boris Johnson who persuaded Ukrainians not to sign this agreement. And as a result, we see this ongoing conflict with Ukraine keep on losing territories after territories. And I believe that this is not in their best interest to keep on fighting against Russia, taking into consideration this discrepancy between our potentials. And if it will keep on going in 2025, we're running the risk of entering into a full-fledged conflict between Russia and the entire NATO, since we see that there are so many NATO weapons that are used against Russia on the Ukrainian soil, so many military that are present there. So I believe the direct military conflict between our civilizations is just a matter of the time, if Europeans will keep on pursuing these very erroneous policies.
Thank you very much. This includes also the situation in Germany here, where, as you may be aware, that the coalition has collapsed, and we will see a vote of no confidence probably on December 16th. And currently there's the danger that the opposition leader of the Christian Democrats, Mr. Merz, may actually gain power or become into a position of power, at the latest at the February 23rd election. And he is really a warmonger and wants to send the Taurus missile immediately. He also made basically a 24-hour, to Putin a kind of a 24-hour, he put pressure on him to say, if he doesn't act the way I want, then I will send Taurus, which is a really a very dangerous situation also going out from Germany. But the next question that I want to bring in also deals with economic issues and the farming issue, but it's to Dennis Small, because an anonymous source in the United States says, last week a bad deal was made between the European Union and the South American member nations of Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. The EU Council President, it says Ursula von der Leyen, but she's the Commission President, flew in on her broom to South America. This deal took 25 years. It is a deal to benefit the world cartels, not the nations and peoples. French farmers went out on the streets against it last week. Italy opposes it. Probably the 27 European nations won't support it. What is this about? And then I will also, or he or she also directs a question to the farm leaders. What should we be doing instead to support farmers in Europe, South America, India, and the US? We have a common interest. Dennis, you go first.
Yeah, just very briefly, and I'll reserve the remainder of my comments for the end and the conclusion. But I mean, the thing is a bad idea. This is a lose-lose proposition. These kinds of free trade agreements, they're sold to each side as a way that they can supposedly get a larger piece of a shrinking pie. And so the effect of these kinds of free trade agreements are meant to pit the South American farmers against the European farmers. It's just like NAFTA in the United States and Mexico and Canada, now no longer called NAFTA, but the free trade agreement involving the same three countries. The Mexicans are told that this is benefiting the United States. The Americans are told that jobs are leaving the United States to go to Mexico. It's a lose-lose proposition for the actual national interests. It benefits only the large cartels and the financial interests that are synonymous with those cartels. So the only way to get out of this is to change the entire basis of the discussion. Free trade agreements are premised on the idea that the market will determine, quote unquote, where the prices end up. That means free trade, it's straightforward. Free trade, let's have free trade, said the elephant to the little mouse. You have to have a protectionist system. You have to have a parity price system where the essentials of physical production are met such that the people on both sides can continue to produce and grow. The entire premise of each of these free trade agreements, whether it be Mercosur, EU, or NAFTA, and so on, is the exact contrary. It's the view of the Hobbesian dog-eat-dog world. And if they can get away selling this to the unfortunate participants on each side, then the ones who run it at the top can say, well, okay, you guys fight it out, and I hope you kill each other off. So it's the wrong direction to go in.
So who wants to pick it up from there? We have Bob and Mike still on. Is Joe also? No, he isn't. So Bob, do you want to respond to this briefly?
Yeah, first, I know Joe's got a time situation. If you would like to make any commentary, I'd like to.
Oh, okay.
Is Joe live?
I think Joe said he had to leave.
Okay.
He said he had to leave for time reasons.
Oh, okay, he froze.
Yeah. So I actually have a question for Dr. Bobrov. I'd like you to say something about Russia and China's diplomatic work bringing about big agricultural changes. I know along the Siberian Railroad, they're building beautiful big elevator systems. And I know Eastern Russia is growing a lot of soybeans, and there's a new land grain exchange corridor concept that's seems, I find, very interesting. Big silos, rail logistics, and I know Xi Jinping and President Putin both have agreed on things, I think, starting back in like about 2016. And now there's a whole discussion about a BRICS grain exchange process. Could you say a little about that?
Yes, for sure, that the grain agreement was very important in Sino-Russian relations, taking into consideration what was going on around Ukraine. Because you do remember that back in 2023, there was this grain deal. So Russia was actually forced to give the green light to the initiative to bring together Ukraine, Africa via Turkey. And we believe that this was a kind of way to give Ukrainians the respite, and they were actually derailing the whole discussion about the food security in general. Because if it was up to Russia, we said that we had so many different logistical solutions to the problem so that Russia could sell grain to Africa, to Middle Eastern countries, circumventing Ukraine and the battlefield of the special military operation. And that is why China exactly came up with the idea of deepening our bilateral cooperation in this field, especially really, that's for sure, taking into consideration the fact that now we see the blooming economy of Far Eastern regions, the one that border on China. Because if we have a look at the 1990s or the early 21st century, we would see that it was only European part of Russia that was developing in terms of agriculture and in terms of their export potential. Now we see that different parts of our country, they are trying to follow suit. And now I believe that this is something that would glue together our two countries, because we will be selling and China will be importing Russian grain and other agricultural commodities, because we are a country that produces, we are actually a superpower in this field, whereas China has 1.5 billion people to feed, and Russia would be the best country to actually give this solution. And I believe that this will create a kind of a template, a model to the one that could be copied by other regions, because we still are interested in helping Middle East countries, Africa, some of our even Latin American allies, for instance, Venezuela and Cuba, especially amid their sanctions that were introduced by the USA against these countries. So I believe, yes, that this is something that is keep on growing and keep on developing, and we have very good examples of how this can be actually operating in different bilateral and multilateral relations in other regions. So thank you so much for focusing your attention on that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So do we have Mike Callicrate? Do you want to also respond to the what should we be doing instead to support farmers in Europe, South America, India, and US? We have a common interest? I think you're still muted. If you would unmute your microphone.
Yes, thank you. I thought Dennis really nailed it when he talked about the need for, the people who make and grow things, and the idea of some semblance of a parity, and what we can do most, I think, for others in other countries is stop preying upon them. What Joe talked about, dumping GMO corn onto Mexico, putting their farmers off the land, only to become hog house janitors for the Chinese-owned Smithfield Corporation, who then was able to feed the below cost of production corn that got dumped into Mexico. Let's stop preying upon these other countries and allow them to have their own sovereign and safe and sustainable food systems. That's what we can do for them, and we should also do it for ourselves. And so that's what I would hope. And I just see the whole financialization community, those who don't make and grow things, those who just prey upon the economy and extract the wealth and leverage it and speculate on it. There's got to be a new world where they have very, very little power left when it's over, and that the people who really make and grow things have priority, and they don't have to get up every day in fear of loss of their livelihood as they are today.
Thank you very much. So we're approaching the 9 o'clock. time barrier. But I would like to encourage everyone still to download this report that I mentioned in the beginning when I introduced the panel. The report called Development Drive Means Billions of New Jobs, No Refugees, No War. Read it through. I think in a very short, concise form, you find all the principles of the credit system that was mentioned today. Many of the projects from the Chancay port to Transaqua, the Inga Dam, and also, for example, that there's a need of tens of thousands of, for example, mechanized construction equipment, etc. So there's really a win-win situation with this program. And I would like to basically initiate a final round of comments from the panelists. I'd like to have Dennis last, and then go maybe from Mike to Bob to Alexander Bobrov, and then Dennis.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to be involved in such an important conversation with global leaders. It's hard to be optimistic, but I'm trying to be optimistic, and I'm hopeful that it might be a possibility that we really go to the root cause of what's causing much of the upset and turmoil in the world. And we often talk about the immigrants that are forced into the southern border of the United States, and what is the real true cause? Why are they coming north? And the people that I've talked to, a lot of them just lack that understanding. What has been the trade policy? What has been the industrial policy? What has been Wall Street's interest, big private equity interest in extracting wealth from these places around the world? And how are we going to relieve them in some way so they could stay home? And so much supportive of this effort, and thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of it today.
The pleasure is all ours. So Bob, go ahead.
Well, I am very happy to participate in this also, and especially having Mike and Joe provide their commentary, and their organization, Farm Action, has excellent material. I just want to mention that. They've done a lot of good research. But in terms of how to look at this, we think back to things like the Great Depression and the wars and the different things. It's just absolutely a crime what has been allowed to happen by these international cartel elites over decades and centuries. And I think right now we've got one of the greatest awakenings taking place, because we do have more people than ever in history who can read and write, and we have a communication system the speed of light. And you put that together, but the key is getting people to go out and take leadership, like Mike and Joe, and like Dr. Bobrov, and people that associate, because the nations of the world are crying out for leadership. And that's where we come in terms of helping educate people in terms of how to understand what's wrong about the current system and what we have to do to make it right. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Dr. Bobrov, please.
Yes, I would like to thank all of those who participate in this conference, and I would like to thank the International Schiller Institute for convening this whole event, and especially I would like to thank our consecutive interpreters for performing their tasks, because I do understand how arduous it is to translate all of our words and phrases into so many languages. And in a certain way, I believe that they are also diplomats, because they're trying to create this cohesion between people who speak in different languages. So I would like to thank everyone who was involved in this, in the preparation and in performing their tasks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All the translators will be happy tonight, and also the technical staff will be very happy. They're working like wizards in the background. Dennis, I give you the final comments for tonight. I cannot hear you. Hold on.
I think they'll be happy. I think they will also be tired, but that's good because tomorrow's another day. And I certainly subscribe to those remarks by Dr. Bobrov. Let me just start with a disclaimer. I don't have $1 trillion in money. Nobody has $1 trillion in money. They just say they do. It's completely fictitious assets. What we have, however, and we do have it, is $1 trillion in credit. And it's as readily issued as we can get our governments to assume a very different outlook than has prevailed under the Wall Street City of London system. Let me go back to an idea which was discussed in some detail in the last panel, because I found it fascinating and I want to try to add a little bit to that, which was Helga's discussion of the concept of the one humanity being that which has to incorporate the actual self-interest of every single nation. That what is actually the interest of a nation is that which forces or allows for all of humanity to progress. And she commented that President Xi Jinping's concept that he has presented of a unified single future for the good of all humanity goes in exactly that direction. I think it's also the case that what President Putin presented in his November 7th comments at the Valdai Club speak exactly in the same direction, where he talked about polyphony. And what he said was that we don't want a world of cacophony, nor do we want a world of polycentric voices. We want a polyphonic world. Now, if you really want to understand that, you're going to have to tune in tomorrow for the 4th panel. But let me just throw out some ideas. Cacophony, imagine kindergarten school where everybody is given a different instrument and the teacher says, do whatever you want. That's cacophony. What is polycentrism? Polycentrism is you get a group of adolescents and you give each of them an instrument, or they're allowed to sing and so on, and you tell them to express themselves, each in their own way. And being adolescents, they will have very profound sentiments, and they will each do their own thing, and they will go off alone and do it, or they'll try to come together, and there may be a melody or so included in there. That's polycentrism. That's not what's needed either. We need the adult approach. You get a bunch of adults in a room under the baton of a competent conductor. You provide them with classical polyphonic music, which means that there are multiple voices, all of them extremely valuable, each with their own culture, each with their own contribution, each with their own pearls of wisdom. But you get them to sing together. You provide a concept, an actual economic underpinning that makes it possible for people to sing with adult voices. That is to say, in such fashion that it improves and makes better and combines richly with other voices, including where you have moments of dissonance, which there certainly will be. And the conductor, like a good diplomat, will bring those dissonant voices into an actual polyphonic composition, where the final result will be better than any of the elements that came into it in the first place. And I think that what President Putin was pointing to, he didn't go through it in great detail, but this concept of polyphony is exactly what's required in economics, in diplomacy, and in science. And let me just conclude by saying that the $1 trillion of credit per year, actually more than that we should apply, has to be in the areas of the most advanced breakthrough areas of technology for all mankind. Yes, we have to strengthen our current systems, no question about it. But we have to think beyond that. We have to think of cooperation among the United States and China and Russia and other powers in space exploration. We have to think in terms of cooperation. I should add India to that. India is a space power as well. We have to think of cooperation in the area of fusion energy that will take us to a world with plentiful supplies of energy, not just quantity, but the quality of energy that's expressed in the power to perform work, that is to say, energy flux density. and in other similar areas of breakthroughs on the technological platform that will allow each and every voice in that adult chorus to perform better the next time around. And I think that is our actual solution to provide optimism where now pessimism prevails. I would be pessimistic too if we walked into a kindergarten and everyone was tooting their own horn. And it's also pessimistic if you think that you are surrounded by nothing but adolescents who want to essentially examine their own belly button, when humanity can actually be adult again. And with that, I would invite you to not only the next panel in the morning, which will include our featured speakers, but including Dr. Pandor and Helga Zepp-LaRouche and many others as well, on the question of the scientific principles behind human development, but also the concluding panel, which will take up this issue of classical culture and polyphony. And I'm sure we'll all be a lot more optimistic and a lot more capable of transforming this world after we've gone through that process. And thanks to all of my fellow participants in this panel.
It's been a great honor to host this panel with so many great adults. And I would like to say this is the conclusion of panel 2 of the Schiller Institute online conference. Today is December 7th, 2024. In the spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, all men become brethren. This is panel 2, the great projects to overcome the migrant crisis, the new quality productive forces, and a new just world economic order. Thank you to Mike Callicrate, to Joe Maxwell, Bob Baker, Alexander Bobrov, Dennis Small, but also to Beda Brata Payne, Glenn Diesen, Michael Limburg, Chandra Muzaffar, Manuel Hassassian, and to Schiller and Beethoven. So thank you very much to that gentlemen have been part of this. As Dennis already said, tomorrow at 9 a.m. US East Coast time, which is 3 p.m. Central European time, there will be panel 3 starting with the science drivers of physical economy, and panel 4 will be between 1 and 4 p.m. US time, that is 7 to 10 p.m. European time, the beauty of the cultures of the world, a dialogue among civilizations. So if you haven't done so yet, become a member of the Schiller Institute. You can do that through the webpage. Because the danger must not paralyze us, become an organizer. The opportunities that we've also presented today should inspire us to do so. Thank you to everybody and good night or good day.